2 years before she died, Veronica Lake said she wanted to write a cookbook. Simple dishes to whip up when you're drunk or tired or both. It didn't sound like something a Hollywood legend would say. But by then, Veronica Lake was no longer the untouchable blonde siren of the 1940s. The peekaboo hair, the icy stare, the femme fatale who captivated audiences. So how did one of classic cinema's brightest stars end up living in cheap hotels, far from the spotlight she once commanded? What happened behind that famous curtain of hair? This is the chilling demise of Veronica Lake, a story far darker than the roles she played. Like many Hollywood stars of her era, Veronica Lake wasn't born Veronica Lake at all. She entered the world in 1922 as Constance Frances Marie Ockelman in Brooklyn, New York, far removed from red carpets and movie premieres. Her father, Harry, worked for an oil company, and her mother, Connie, kept the household running. They were an ordinary middle-class family until tragedy struck. When Constance was just 10 years old, her father was killed in a devastating industrial explosion in Philadelphia. The loss shattered the family. Her mother eventually remarried and moved her from school to school, trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy. But nothing truly felt stable again. In many ways, that rupture marked the end of her childhood. As the years passed, her mother's ambitions began to focus intensely on her daughter. Despite the instability of her upbringing, one thing stood out. Constance was strikingly beautiful. By the time she attended high school in Miami, she was already known around campus for her looks. She wasn't entirely sure she wanted a life built on that attention, but her mother was certain. Determined to turn her daughter into a star, Connie pushed her toward acting, even when it strained their relationship. At just 16, Constance was uprooted again, this time to Beverly Hills. Hollywood, however, did not immediately roll out the welcome mat. She struggled to form connections, and the competitive atmosphere only deepened her insecurities. Her first credited attempt at film work, under the name Constance Keene, ended in disappointment when her small role was cut entirely. Discouraged, but still driven forward by her mother's persistence, she kept auditioning. Then, in 1940, everything changed. Producer Arthur Hornblow Jr. was casting for I Wanted Wings, starring William Holden. The moment he saw her screen test, he recognized something magnetic. He cast her in a leading role. But before she stepped fully into the spotlight, one major change was required. Constance Ockelman would be reinvented. Producer Arthur Hornblow Jr. understood that Constance Keene wasn't a name that would light up marquees. He wanted something more memorable, something cinematic. So he suggested Veronica Lake. He even explained that her eyes were calm and clear like a blue lake, a poetic justification that sounded tailor-made for a rising star. But the name carried a sting. Veronica was actually her mother's real name, and by then, she desperately wanted distance from her domineering parent. When she learned that this would be her new identity, she later admitted, "I just sat down and cried." The rebranding was already in motion. There was no turning back. When I Wanted Wings premiered, she was still a teenager. But overnight, Veronica Lake became a sensation. Though she barely stood over 5 feet tall, she commanded the screen. Critics described her as seductive and mischievous, with a voice and presence that lingered long after the scene ended. Even before the film's release, she was being called the find of 1941. Yet behind the glamour, cracks were already forming. On set, Lake developed a reputation for being difficult. She often missed call times, frustrating director Mitchell Leisen to the point that he reportedly kept her on set all day to ensure she wouldn't disappear. She was young, overwhelmed, and already carrying the pressure of sudden fame. Confidence sometimes came across as defiance. Then, by accident, a legend was born. During filming, her hair kept falling across one eye, creating a dramatic, shadowed look. Embarrassed, she feared she had ruined her chances. But Hornblow saw something else entirely. He told her to keep it. That peekaboo hairstyle became iconic, instantly recognizable and endlessly imitated. In a single gesture, Veronica Lake transformed from a promising newcomer into a cultural phenomenon. Men were captivated by Veronica Lake, but women were obsessed with her hair. The peekaboo style she wore in I Wanted Wings became an instant sensation. That swoop of blonde covering one eye turned into a national trend, a symbol of mystery and glamour that's still iconic today. For the first time in her life, Lake was on top, but even as her fame soared, her personal life was moving just as fast. In 1940, still a teenager, she met art director John S. Detley. He was 14 years older, established in Hollywood, and everything about the relationship felt rushed. Yet Lake plunged in head first, marrying him shortly after they met. It was impulsive, and it would soon complicate everything. After the success of I Wanted Wings, Paramount cast her in Sullivan's Travels, opposite Joel McCrea and directed by the celebrated Preston Sturges. Expectations were sky high. Veronica Lake was now a bankable star. But when she walked onto set on the first day of filming, there was a shock no one had anticipated. Lake had kept a major secret. She was 6 months pregnant. As production began, her condition was impossible to hide, especially from Sturges. Accounts say his surprise quickly turned into fury. He felt blindsided, and the tension on set was immediate. Though the production found ways to conceal her pregnancy with careful staging, costuming, and camera angles, the atmosphere had already soured. Lake's behavior didn't help. Whether from stress, hormones, insecurity, or something deeper, she clashed with cast and crew. She was described as moody, withdrawn, sometimes openly combative. By the end of filming, Joel McCrea reportedly declared he would never work with her again, saying, "Life's too short for 2 films with Veronica Lake." Her reputation as difficult began to stick, but beneath the headlines and Hollywood gossip, something more complicated and more troubling was unfolding. Veronica Lake may have been a reluctant star, but she still immersed herself in fame, both metaphorically and literally. As her celebrity grew, so did her drinking. Part of it was pressure. Hollywood moved fast and expected perfection. Part of it was the thrill of nightlife, the parties, the attention. But the lifestyle took its toll. She often arrived on set exhausted and visibly hungover, which only added to her growing reputation for being unreliable. Alcohol wasn't her only indulgence. Though she was married with children, Lake's personal life was anything but quiet. Rumors and reports linked her to powerful and famous men, including Howard Hughes, Aristotle Onassis, and even Marlon Brando. Fame gave her access, and she didn't shy away from it. Yet the one man who seemed to truly compliment her wasn't a lover at all. Early in her career, Lake starred opposite Alan Ladd in This Gun for Hire. Their on-screen chemistry was undeniable, and unlike with many co-stars, they genuinely got along. They also shared a practical advantage. Ladd, who stood about 5 feet 6 inches, was famously sensitive about his height. Lake, barely 5 feet tall, made him appear taller on camera. The pairing worked, and studios quickly reunited them in several films. But harmony didn't last everywhere. In 1942, Lake took on the romantic comedy I Married a Witch, and from the start, production was rocky. Joel McCrea, who had previously sworn off working with her, was no longer involved. Instead, she was paired with Frederick March, and sparks flew immediately, though not the romantic kind. March reportedly dismissed her as a brainless little blonde, questioning her talent before filming had even begun. Lake didn't stay quiet. She fired back, calling him arrogant and pretentious. The tension escalated before a single scene was shot. Once production started, the hostility didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. And Lake, never one to back down, decided she wasn't going to make it easy for him. During filming of I Married a Witch, Veronica Lake didn't just clash with Frederick March, she actively made his life difficult. What she later described as practical jokes were anything but harmless. In one scene where March had to carry her, she reportedly hid a 40-pound weight inside her costume to make the lift nearly impossible. In another, during waist-up shots, she would jab her foot sharply into him off-camera. Small in stature, yes, but never powerless. Her behavior cemented a reputation that was spreading quickly through Hollywood. The industry has little patience for anyone labeled difficult, especially young actresses. Stories circulated and colleagues began turning on her. Actor Eddie Bracken, who barely worked with her on Star-Spangled Rhythm, later bluntly said she was known as the bitch and claimed she had earned it. Whether exaggerated or not, the damage to her image was real. Then life struck her with something far more painful than gossip. In July 1943, after welcoming her daughter Elaine, Lake was pregnant again with her husband John Detley's child. While working on set, she tripped over a cable and went into premature labor. She gave birth to a baby boy, Anthony, who was too fragile to survive. He lived only about a week. The loss devastated her. The grief strained her already fragile marriage, and by the end of that year, Lake and Detley had divorced. Grieving, overwhelmed, and without healthy coping tools, she made another sudden decision, remarrying just months later, this time to director André de Toth. They would go on to have 2 children together, Michael and Diana. But stability never quite followed her. As her personal life grew more chaotic, the world itself was in turmoil. World War II was raging, and unexpectedly Lake found herself at the center of a national issue. Her famous peekaboo hairstyle had become so popular that women working in ammunition factories were copying it, only to have their loose hair caught in heavy machinery. The government urged her to change the style publicly and encourage safer looks. Lake agreed, appearing in promotional campaigns urging women to pin their hair back. It was patriotic. It was responsible. But it also marked the quiet beginning of her decline. When Veronica Lake agreed to change her famous hairstyle for the war effort, something unexpected happened. The peekaboo look that had made her a sensation was gone, and with it, much of her mystique. Beginning in 1944, her films struggled. Audiences no longer seemed captivated. In The Hour Before Dawn, her attempt at a German accent drew unintended laughter. Even a public appearance in Boston for a war bonds event fell flat, with critics describing her speech as gloomy and uninspiring. By the mid-1940s, her career was slipping fast. Then came what looked like a second chance. In 1946, she was cast in the film noir The Blue Dahlia. On paper, it was the perfect comeback. The screenplay was written by acclaimed mystery author Raymond Chandler, and Lake was reunited with Alan Ladd, her most successful co-star. It had all the ingredients of redemption. But behind the scenes, tensions simmered. Chandler was a respected but volatile figure, struggling with heavy drinking and racing to finish the script as filming began. Lake, unfamiliar with his work, relied on studio publicity notes instead of reading his novels. When she made casual comments about him to the press, Chandler took offense. He already had doubts about her talent, and their relationship quickly deteriorated. Chandler was blunt about his opinion. He reportedly said she was at her best when she keeps her mouth shut and looks mysterious, and mocked some of her close-ups. After the film's release, even though it was a box office success, he delivered a cutting insult that stuck. He nicknamed her Veronica Lake. The film revived her briefly, but the feud became part of her legacy. And soon, she would face problems far more serious than harsh words. After the success of The Blue Dahlia faded, Veronica Lake's brief resurgence began to unravel. For a time, she and her husband, director André de Toth, appeared solid. They even bought a plane, and Lake earned her pilot's license, an unusual accomplishment that reflected her restless spirit. They worked together on several projects, but the films underperformed. By 1948, Paramount dropped her from its contract roster. The studio that had once built her image had now moved on, and the strain seeped into her marriage. The early 1950s brought mounting financial trouble. Roles were scarce, expenses high. In 1952, the IRS seized her home over unpaid taxes. The loss hit her hard. Already fragile, she suffered a severe breakdown. In a dramatic break from her life, she used her pilot's license to fly alone from Los Angeles to New York, leaving behind her husband and children. By her own account, she was finished with Hollywood. What followed was murky and unsettled. She attempted stage work and small appearances, but drifted between hotels in New York, drinking more heavily. In 1955, she married songwriter Joseph Allen McCarthy, but that union ended 4 years later. She kept her distance from the film industry, determined to stay out of its glare. Then, in 1962, a New York Post journalist tracked her down. The discovery stunned readers. The once glamorous Veronica Lake was working as a cocktail waitress at the Martha Washington Hotel in Manhattan, living under the name Connie de Toth. The story reignited public interest. Fans sent money assuming she had fallen into destitution. But Lake bristled at the idea of being pitied. She insisted she had chosen the job because she liked talking to people, not because she had nowhere else to go. Out of pride, she returned nearly all the donations. Nearly all. When news spread that Veronica Lake was working as a cocktail waitress, one person who heard about it was her former lover, Marlon Brando. Without hesitation, he arranged for a check for $1,000 to be sent to her. Lake didn't cash it, but she didn't send it back either. Instead, she kept it, even framing it as a reminder of a different chapter of her life. It wasn't about the money. It was about being remembered. To fans, the story felt bittersweet and strangely comforting. But for Lake, the renewed attention stirred something complicated. After years of trying to escape Hollywood, she felt its pull again. Within months, she returned to acting, taking small television and film roles and publishing her memoir, The Autobiography of Veronica Lake. She was back in the spotlight, but the industry had changed, and so had she. Hollywood has always been unforgiving about aging, especially for women whose fame was built on image. Years of heavy drinking had taken a visible toll. Reporters noted that she looked far older than her mid-40s. The mystique that once defined her was gone, replaced by a harsher reality. In 1969, at 47, she was awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It should have been a triumphant moment. Instead, when she arrived for the ceremony, only a handful of people were there. The turnout was painfully small. For someone who had once caused a national hairstyle craze, the indifference cut deeply. The final years of her life grew increasingly lonely. Trust had become scarce. Her relationship with her mother had long been strained, so strained that her mother had once sued her for financial support while Lake was heavily pregnant. Her relationships with her children were complicated as well, marked by distance and unresolved pain. By then, Veronica Lake understood something harsh. Fame fades, but its consequences linger. Although the autobiography of Veronica Lake expressed regret about the time she felt she had lost with her children, her later interviews painted a harsher, more complicated picture. By the end of her life, trust had become nearly impossible for her. She once said bluntly, "I am not going to hang on to my blood, nor am I going to allow them to hang on to me. I know what was done to me by my mother, and I'm not going to do that." It was a revealing statement. Lake had long believed that her own childhood, dominated by a forceful, ambitious mother, had shaped much of her instability. Rather than risk repeating that dynamic, she distanced herself. But the distance left her isolated. The damage, emotional and psychological, had followed her for decades. Even so, she retained a sharp, sometimes dark sense of humor about her legacy. "I will have one of the cleanest obits of any actress," she once joked. "I never did cheesecake like Ann Sheridan or Betty Grable. I just used my hair." She even embraced a cruel label one critic had given her, referring to herself with a wink as a sex zombie. Humor for her was armor. By 1973, however, the armor was cracking. She was still touring the country to promote her autobiography when she began suffering severe abdominal pain while in Vermont. Doctors examined her and delivered devastating news. After years of heavy drinking, she had advanced cirrhosis of the liver. The prognosis was grim, just weeks to live. As predicted, in early July 1973, Veronica Lake died at age 50 from acute hepatitis and kidney failure. The end was quiet and clinical, far removed from the glamour that had once surrounded her name. Lake had often downplayed her own talent, once remarking, "You could put all the talent I had into your left eye and still not suffer from impaired vision." Critics like Raymond Chandler had reinforced those doubts, yet others disagreed. Director Renee Claire observed that she was a very gifted girl, but she didn't believe she was gifted. That lack of belief may have hurt her more than any bad review. After her death, another layer of her story emerged. Her mother claimed that Lake had been diagnosed with schizophrenia at a young age, a condition that, if true, might explain her mood swings, irritability, and erratic decisions. Some modern interpretations suggest that her drinking was not simply indulgence, but self-medication, a way to quiet anxiety, insecurity, and possibly deeper mental struggles. Veronica Lake's life was a haunting contradiction, an icon of icy glamour on screen, yet deeply fragile behind the curtain of that famous hair. Was she a victim of Hollywood's cruelty, her own inner battles, or a system that built her up only to cast her aside? Even decades later, her story still feels unsettlingly modern. What do you think truly led to her tragic downfall? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the rise and fall of Hollywood's most unforgettable stars, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories like this. Until next time, stay tuned.